Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Um, Many of researchers, many of people who are doing research towards a PhD or masters, I believe struggling trying to conduct a literature review. So I would like to share some of my thoughts regarding literature review. Using the book that I've earlier used in my previous video, Halina Kornuta. You can search for this book. But I want to bring you to the importance of trying to understand what literature review is all about. So I'm not going to. I will describe and also explain what the authors is trying to present, and also trying to inform all of you who are doing research on how to conduct literature review, especially when you are actually in the writing stage of your thesis. Okay, and it's actually a continuation of the previous background of the study and the purpose statement of the research. So part of the process in which you understand how to develop the purpose statement is actually through the literature review, right? So the purpose of literature review is actually to provide readers with a context for the study in terms of the historical background of the issue, the theoretical framework for the topic, and the different perspectives that has been reported by other researchers. And your job is actually to combine them and to analyze them. So to report on studies of a similar nature. So for example, if you are doing on total quality management and you want to focus on electrical and electronic industry, so maybe you want to look at other researchers who've already conducted research on TQM. If particularly you're looking for the critical success factors for TQM implementation. So that's where you look at different perspectives, and your job is actually to find things which have not been answered yet. So note that the literature review is not research itself. It is, it's part of the process of understanding the problem. So it's not the research itself, but it helps set the context for the study and points to the significance of the research you plan to do. So this is important. It's important for you to understand that you want to put into perspective, you want to put into context, you want to relate to other areas. So a good literature review summarizes and critiques related to studies. So it summarizes and criticizes related studies and shows how they are finding link to the problem that you are going to investigate. Okay. And a good literature review should also present contrasting views about the topic. So this is something that this is a skill in which researchers must develop in trying to look at the differences, the contrasting views that has been presented or been explained or reported by other researchers. Okay, so I think it is very important to understand that. Okay, you can read the book, but I'm going to probably highlight important things. The review of the literature provides an important connection between existing knowledge and the problem being investigated. It sets the issue you will study in the context of bigger picture. So I like the word, compare and contrast. In my previous video also, in some other video, I said, compare and contrast. If you cannot compare and contrast, you cannot synthesize and you do not analyze, then the literature review will just be a reporting of others. No, and what I find most mistake that many young researchers and new researchers is trying to report as many as possible, but there is no relevance. You're just picking up paper, journal paper, conference paper just for the sake of patching into your, so-called review. That's not the idea. The whole idea is the literature review moves from the general to the specific, and from the older perspectives to the newer perspectives. Okay. So when you move, as your literature review becomes more focused, you will find your purpose statement needs refining. Okay. And it is important also to understand, it's pertinent to mention what is not literature review. That's why I say it is not primarily a collection of quotation from other writers. I think you know what's the meaning of collection of quotation. You just quote from one author and patch it and, cut and paste from another author, cut and paste, without any analyzing and any putting your own comments, and also putting in your own perspective, putting in your own critical analysis, or putting in your own understanding. Okay, so that needs time to. So it is not a collection of quotation from other writers. If you do that, please stop doing it. Okay, it doesn't mean to people who examine thesis immediately, we can pick up that this is actually cutting and paste from other journal papers or books, without even ability to put understanding into it. Okay, so while reporting about the findings and perspective of others is important, must be done in a way that your own flow of thought and organization is evident. That's why I said, if you're able to actually summarize others, for example, the findings of author A was so and so, and then it is actually similar to what author B has found. Okay, and you need to paraphrase. Paraphrase means you need to rewrite according to your own words. Okay, comparing and contrasting perspective. That's what I said. Compare, contrast, expressed by different authors, and avoid plagiarism by giving credit when paraphrasing or quoting. You can quote, no problem about it. Okay. Right, so I'm going to probably just skip that. This is very important, how you brainstorm and organize content for the literature review. You must understand, there are many topics and many keywords. So I like to, when I say literature review must not be sequentially reporting author A said this, author A found this, author B found this, author B found this. No, it must be thematic. It must be based on themes rather than based on what we call reporting for from different authors. So you may want to organize your content for literature using a fishbone diagram, something like this. You can use this. Let me just small this. You can start seeing the whole, concepts or even definitions. Well, normally when you start literature review, we want to define, you want to characterize, define concepts, define principles, define terms. Then you zoom down into concepts, defining concept, defining principle, defining theories. Theory of self-esteem has been developed by so and so. Okay, you see here. theory of self-esteem. There is a psychodynamic perspective, there is a sociological perspective, there is a behavioral perspective, there is also a cognitive experimental perspective. So you need to, see the development and try to, look at where you can actually contribute. So this is Fishbone way of trying to conduct the literature review. Okay, or you can also come up with so this is the list of things, or you can use this so-called map. Okay, concept map. So you should think from this, the big picture, and then you start finding small, areas according to the themes, according to the issues that you actually want to report, and also that you want to find out. Okay, so that's very important. Very important that you need to actually have that thinking for developing a good literature review. Of course, when you talk about literature review, will not run away from maintaining an ongoing annotated bibliography for all the journals that you have read. Imagine during my time of doing PhD, we do not have all the software. We need to actually manually monitor and keep up to date pen and pencil and paper, pen and paper style. Today you have a lot of software that can actually be useful for helping you, but don't depend 100% on the software, but it is our thinking process that is actually important. So these are some thoughts, some tips, so some checklists that you can develop your own system. Use assignment from classes to build, review, search electronic database. When reading the conclusion of articles, note the unanswered question and comments about the need for future research. And this is where you find the gap actually. Find the gap from the conclusion of the studies, and you actually analyze and you note down, you ask yourself question, this has not been done. This has not been investigated. Not just, but from the conclusion, you can actually look at the need for future study. So need for future study indicate to us that it can be explored further. Okay, so you want to do that as well. And I always want people to always know the gurus within the area of interest and consider being personally in touch with them, so that you know who are in your area, so that you will follow the publication from that particular person, and you can keep up to date of what you're looking at. Okay, right. And the literature review obviously will have an introduction part. Okay, the introduction to chapter 2 provides a reorientation. I will always recommend that for every chapter you write an introduction. The purpose of this chapter is what? Or this chapter describes a literature review of the related issues on whatever you are studying. Okay, and find all these verbs that actually will be important for reporting findings, such as so and so believe that, so and so argued for, it was observed that this author have not been reviewed. You have reviewed the finding of. So these are verbs or phrases for reporting findings, and you can express them, okay, carefully. And then historical overview of the theories or the purposes of the study, and then the current findings and chapter summary. So basically, so this is a literature review. Let me just show you one what do you call slide from another publication. Okay, before we go, let me just share with you from another reference, okay, from another set of slides from a book, which actually describe the literature review process, beginning from the research questions and objectives, finding the parameters, conduct research, obtain the literature, evaluate, record, generate search items, start drafting the review, and right until and continuous update the search, and so on, refine the search item, and doing the written critical review of the literature. I mentioned that you need to have this compare and contrast concept, where you must look from different authors. So, for example, these are the different authors for a specific issue that you're trying to look at, and there are different themes. For example, you talk about critical factors for sustainability. You can look at the theme one from the perspective of economic means, second theme from environmental, and then third theme from the cause, or fourth theme from the the social perspective. So you want to across is actually doing a compare and contrast. So I always emphasize that you need to compare and contrast, and it requires you to do synthesis and analysis of different findings from different authors on specific issues, specific items or elements for that matter. So that's why I do not agree so much on sequential. Sequential means in the literature review you report Alonso, you describe Alonso's finding, then you go to Button, then you go. This is sequential. Okay, it's not a good practice. It is useful for certain, for example, historical perspective is okay, but when you go down to trying to look at the research gap or the research issues, so this is what you need to do, which is actually compare and contrast. And you can also have this using a relevance tree as suggested by Saunders. Again, same concept as having a fishbone diagram or a concept map, so that you know where you want to find your literature and issues that you want to actually actually explain and describe what others have done. And this is basically my my area, okay, in Saunders' book, benchmarking and total quality management. So this is benchmarking. You need to look at the theory of benchmarking, the practice, the techniques for benchmarking, internal benchmarking, external benchmarking, and and what the case studies. And you look at TKM, okay, the implementation process, implementation, framework which I developed in 2000. TKM practice, TKM theory, and not Juran. This should be a Juran, Juran. And today it's much easier because you can use online databases. There's a lot of materials. That's why you need to be selective and also be aware of some articles are just noisy. They are not relevant to your research. You can just push it aside. So right. So that's my sharing. That is my sharing today. Please leave comments, and also please post questions if you have any questions. I will share more in the future, inshallah. Thank you for the time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.